I am a 29-year-old man from Manchester, England. The events in the story occurred 14 years ago when I was 15 years of age. So I'll try to remember this in as much detail as I can all these years later. I was in Manchester, Victoria train station, waiting to catch a train to Liverpool, where I am originally from. I moved to Manchester, age 2, a lucky escape from a lifetime of goosehood. My train wasn't for another 25 to 30 minutes, so I decided to go and stand outside the station for a cigarette. It wasn't legal to smoke back then, but not far off, and looked around 18 to other people, so I never really thought anything of smoking in busy public places like that, and have always been a streetwise, rebellious, and little rough type lad, so I wasn't the kind of underage smoker who'd be cowering out of sight in an alley somewhere, scared of getting caught. I'd been stood smoking my cig for around 5 minutes, lost in thought and planning my escapes during my escapades during my month-long stay at my uncle's house in Liverpool, and had about half done with my smoke and slightly scruffy, slightly smaller, I'm 5'11", man of around 40 approached me and asked for a light. After handing my lighter back, he settles next to me on the wall outside the station. As he tells me he's pissed off because he can't roll joints, and his girlfriend wouldn't roll for him because they'd argued. I'm a bit taken aback by such forwardness, but not too much, as I was wearing a bandana with weed leaves all over it, and took that as a reason for this man's openness with his drug business, considering this was in 2001, and today's relaxed attitude towards weeds were just a MLK-esque dream in the mind of some stoner, so such openness would normally be unusual and very dodgy. Me being a 14-year-old full of bravado and not enough common sense, I started boasting about how well I could roll a joint, leading to the man asking me to come over to the canal, near enough, right next to the station and away from prying eyes, to roll his 10-bag up into a few joints in exchange for 5 pounds. I'm not and never was a stupid person, and this already seemed a little off to me, as I knew Manchester Canal was to be notorious for gay activity and street robbery. What the frick do you mean, gay activity? I'm sorry, guys. That just kind of pissed me off a bit. Back to the story. Activity and street robbery, but as stated before, I was 15, lacking in fear, and seeing that this guy was smaller than me, I decided he'd come off worse if he tried to fuck or harm me. So we went to the canal, him having handed me the $5 as soon as I agreed. He passed me his weed papers, and we sat on a bench as I got to work. Him making small talk and me doing my best to answer whilst concentrating on the spliff building. I remember I wasn't really fully registering his words and was replying with generic yeahs and such until he asked me if I was still a virgin. This made me pay a bit more attention, as, coupled with the location and its reputation, this put me on edge, and I tensed up a bit, although I answered his questions with a quick, "Nah, I've got a bird mate." At this point, I am only halfway through rolling the first joint, and the man begins to act paranoid as fuck. If I could try to explain where we were for a second, we were in an area off to the side of the canal with this station back up and ramp behind us and a bridge leading over from one street to another via crossing the canal about 100 yards down to the left and a tunnel underneath the rail line about 150 yards down the path to the right. The man starts saying he's worried about police coming, as somebody just walked over the bridge and saw me skinning up, according to him, and he suggests we walk down the right-hand path and under the tunnel where we'd be out of sight of the bridge. Again, overconfident and telling the man that I want one of the joints if I miss my train. I agree, and we gather this stuff together and move off towards the bridge once I'd done the first joint, which he tells me to light and go first on, which I do. As we walked, he said something else to me, and it brought home the reality of my situation and made me seethe with anger, feeling a mixture of disbelief and insult that he'd even think me worth trying it with him. Have you ever sucked cock before? Me. You fucking what, pal? Him. It's good, you know. Receiving feels even better. Ever had a man suck you off? At this point, I'm stunned, speechless, struggling to hold back a rising tide of anger and indignation. I have always had an issue with people's discreet. I've always had an issue with taking people's disrespect and lying to me in order to put me in a position with ulterior motives and high disrespect, in my opinion. I have stopped walking now, as was he, and I'm seriously debating whether or not to try to take this man's jaw off his face. When I decided better off it, thinking back to the person on the bridge the man claimed to have seen earlier, and thinking that there might be police heading over this way shortly, I throw the joint into the water and the weed and things at the man's feet with an angry exclamation. Fucking prick. I don't think he expected such a strong, confident reaction from such a young lad, because now he seemed stunned to silence and didn't react to his weed being thrown about, or me walking off back up the path towards the station telling him to fuck off. And I'd break his neck if he came anywhere near me again. He just stared. He just stared after me, looking vacantly, until I'd lost sight of him. I felt like I'd won in this situation at the time. I got a $5, and I got a $5 stoned and backed down a man more than twice my age, so I felt pretty good about how it turned out. Then about 3 years later, a man went missing after a Stone Roses concert in Heaton Park, Manchester, a couple of miles from the canal. His body was pulled out of the canal a short time after. In the wake of massive national media attention, he had somehow got separated from his friends and ended up halfway across the city and in a canal. His case highlighted many dozens of similar deaths, always of young men who went missing in Manchester over the last 20 years or so, only to be pulled out of the canal, dead, and in some cases with signs of foul play present. There is quite a lot of controversy around these deaths, as the people of Manchester feel they may have a serial killer on the loose, putting all these young, fit men in the canal. And up until recently, the police refused to look into the deaths properly, assuming they all, absurdly, to be drunken accidents by young men attempting to piss in the canal while and falling and drowning. I don't know what the truth is, but it's a fascinating subject and can be found online with a search for Manchester Canal Killer or something similar. One thing I do know, though, is whether you're just a lonely gay with a taste for teenage boys, or the reason so many young men have been pulled dead from the Manchester Canal. Let's not meet.